Tennessee, David Tulis.
This is David Tulis. I thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time here at Nooga Radio. We're trying to figure out about several hot topics, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to go national today. I'm going to have to talk about a national story and not give necessarily a local angle to it, because there's not clearly one, except perhaps in principle. David Tulis here, the man with the bow tie, who got out of the house today without being inspected by Jeanette, and whose costume for radio presentation may not be what you expect. But that only matters to the man who watches on YouTube and on Facebook. And we are there, by the way, YouTube at Hot News Talk Radio and on Facebook at Nooga Radio. The question is, on the national side, the doings of Stephen Paddock and his brother Eric, who is quoted in the press with very unusual connections. And also, I'm going to change the subject. We're going to get back to that, but right now I'm going to change the subject to another one, and that is the rate of inflation. We're told that the Fed, overseen by Grandma Yellen, has a target, and that target is 2% inflation. And you think, oh, come on, David, let's not talk about that. We've got important things to talk about that are of national scale. But we have done that. We have looked at this question about justice versus security. And I'm listening to Matt Ray on America's First News this morning here on Nooga Radio, and talking with people who are psychiatrists and people who discuss mental health and weigh the problems of mental health, and asking the question is always, what can we do to stop these kinds of events happening as in Las Vegas? Well, the answer is you can't. They simply can't be stopped. Even if you had a totalitarian society where there was a police officer at every stoplight and surveillance cameras on every light pole, you would still have things like this happen. And so we're not going to be able to stop these kinds of private terror acts. Of course, there's terrorism, which is a public demonstration of terrorism. As I'm coming to understand it, is a form of religious worship. And the idol that is to be worshipped is fear itself. And so there are purveyors of fear. It's not clear that Stephen Paddock had that in mind, though we don't know yet. The question about inflation is one I'd like to suggest it affects you today. And the inflation target of 2% means that the Fed wants to debase the value of the dollar 2% per year. So at the end of the year, assuming that the target's met on January 1st, at the end of the year, your dollar buys 2% less. It's worth only $98 in the course of the injection of new money, new debt into the economy by the Fed itself and all of its partners in the banking sector. The banking sector is the only industry which makes wealth from nothing. And as we remember from 2008, had to be bailed out to the tune of $900 billion because of the dangers of success, right? Because success in that sector breeds excess, and then there's a recognition that the whole is built just on confidence. And if you can't have confidence in the underlying debt and all of it equally valuable, equally good, then you're going to have a rush to the exits and an uncertainty as to what the value of the paper you're holding is. And that's why there was a seizing up in the credit markets that affected primarily, David Stockman says in his book, Wall Street. The next one I'm gonna propose will affect Main Street as well. That is to say, us here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. We're in a bubble already. The recovery of the stock market to 2008 levels is a picture of that. There's nothing fundamentally better about the American economy in the past 10 years, but there has been a steady injection, a steady strip mining of wealth from the people, an injection of credit into the economy. And so shares are at their peak, and I suggest you sell. Okay, take a profit in paper profit, sell, liquidate those shares now, and not continue to commit yourself to a market in the scrofulous dollar, all in terms of dollars, of course, these measurements, and in nominal dollars at that. So they're not real dollars inflation adjusted, but nominal dollars, and you're going to make a profit, right? You sell at a profit, and bring your so-called dollars home, and maybe as you gain perspective, you can think of loco-centric investing, which Stephanie Crow and others are discussing. We'd like to have a loco-centric investment hub where you put money in a local pool, and those who are involved in business, whether new or traditional, can borrow from that pool or have investment capital from that pool with generous terms and a patient investor group willing to wait for the profit, since they have a loco-centric perspective. That's something. It might not work, but it's something I think that's entirely possible. And there are examples of that happening around the country. Now, on inflation, I'm suggesting that the rate of inflation is really much higher than the target. And the reason is, according to Charles Hugh Smith in his very important work as a monetary observer and a kind of cultural and economic analyst of 2miles.com, he proposes that inflation is higher than we're told, and that's because the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, has unreasoning allocations. Housing is not actual rents paid. Housing portion of that count of that barometer, which is 42% of the whole. Housing is not mortgage payments either. Healthcare, which is 18% of the nation's economy based as a percentage of GDP, is only 8.5% in the Consumer Price Index. In other words, it's underweighted, and we all know how so-called inflation has just ripped through medical expenses, and you may be spending $30,000 on insurance, and have a $15,000 deductible, unreasonable to the max. And another part three of this index, again, which has an effect of undercounting inflation, is that higher education costs for those who can pay for them are much larger than 6.9%. So he says that because of these reasons, we have vast inflation that's not registered in the official count, which is under 2%. And so we have a loss of buying power that we're suffering in the local economy here in Chattanooga, and we have a lot of credit. We can see all around buildings going up, apartment complexes, housing complexes, and in Hickson here on Highway 153, across from tire discounters, there's a new building being built. The ground is being cleared now, and looks like the next step in that tire discount place, another national chain, will be clearing the ground. There's big pile of dirt there. It looks like it has to be moved today, and then it will be working on the inside of that building. So you have retailers going up. There's easy money all around, and that's because easy money is created in a fractional reserve system, and in the hedge fund field where people gamble on the gyrating valuations between competing monetary systems, which are fiat paper. In other words, paper money schemes, the euro versus the dollar, and people play on the changes among them and make a profit. That's not called capitalism anymore. That's called debt capitalism, and another term for it is financialization. And that a term that implies that nothing of value is produced, right? Not like what you do, my listener. You create a value for your customer. You are working. You're sweating. You are improving. You're making calls. You're serving people with a good or service. And that's a real value, right? But in this other sector, in the national economy, the international economy, value is not created, and yet giant profits are made and then invested in productive assets. And anymore, these are companies that create an income stream, and we all want to have an income stream, and so that's something we need to consider. The reason we have a financialization to begin with, and the reason we have inflation, is because we have rejected a local economy principle. And there are five, you might say, five claims of local economy. Near is better than far. small is better than big, and simple is better than complex, right? But down in the footnotes is the one I want to mention. Well, there are two that I want to mention. 4 is personal is better than corporate, and 5 is physical is better than abstract. And the fifth one deals with the question of the medium of exchange. It used to be in your grandfather's time. It used to be silver money circulated alongside Federal Reserve notes, which were called silver certificates, because a note was a certificate allowing you to claim the thing that the note represented. That would be the dollar coin, right? Or $5 coins would be the piece of paper that had a 5 written on it. And if you had a piece of paper with a 10 on it, that meant that you could go to the issuer of that note, the bank, or the central bank, and get 10 rounds or 10 silver coins, each being $1. And if you had a piece of paper with 100 on it, that was a signification that when that note was issued, there were 100 coins on reserve in the vaults of the party that issued that piece of paper, the Federal Reserve System. And it used to be true, but it's not true now. And so we have a system in which the person who lends value is being robbed, and the person coming out ahead is the borrower. And because of this inflationary system, as Garrett and other writers explain, we have built into our system the profit of debt, right? The value of debt, the wealth of debt is built into the American system. If you're in business, you better be in debt, because otherwise you're paying an income tax. And so we're all avoiding income in the American economy, and having more debt, and it's structural, right? The system of paper money economy is structural, and to make sure that people will accept your dodgy paper in the future, right? Your dollars in the future. There are things called legal tender laws, and legal tender law that we have in the national economy is against local economy, and it's against God, and it's against God because it requires people who make a contract in dollars to be forced to accept in repayment later, right? Dollars that are of declining value. These aren't fixed dollars anymore. And yet, of course, all contracts today, with few exceptions, are in the paper dollar, and no one really knows what that is, and it's continually declining in value. And they're ungodly because they require people. You don't have to have a law to accept people to require repayment of their debts in lawful money, right? You don't have to force people to accept that. But if you have bad money, fiat money, you have to have a law compelling people to accept payment here in Chattanooga in that bad paper. Legal tender law simply requires people to accept bad money. It takes you might say a civil coercion to make bad money acceptable. But Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And in Federalist number 44, we have Madison's opposition to paper money. Patrick Henry opposed it. Daniel Webster said it's unconstitutional. And Noah Webster, the lexicographer, right, who gave us the Webster's Dictionary, called legal tender law, a tender law, either state or federal, the devil. And he said that if you pass these laws requiring payment in these state banknotes, we had colonial banknotes that were required to be accepted by the lender, right? The lender was being robbed by the borrower who was repaying in reduced value paper promises, and the lender had to accept it because of these legal tender laws. Legal tender laws, Noah Webster said, are the preliminary to adulterated money, and all those who favor them are counterfeiters deserving the gallows, he said, or at least a whipping post. And there's a quote in which he says, remember that past contracts are sacred things, that legislatures have no right to interfere with them. They have no right to say that a debt shall be paid at a discount or in any manner which the parties never intended. It is the business of justice to fulfill the intentions of parties in contracts, not to defeat them. So justice is where you go to the court if you have a dispute with someone who's not honoring a contract. That's what the courts are for, right? The courts are open for that, to settle that grievance. Hamilton County Circuit Court, Hamilton County Chancery Court here in Hamilton County. These venues are available to settle disputes. And you don't want to have a law that says, well, one party has to accept payment from the other party in at discount, and that's what the paper money scheme requires. That the recipient is always required to take payment in reduced value dollars. To pay bona fide contracts for cash, he says, in paper of little value or in old horses, would be a dishonest attempt in an individual. But for legislature to frame laws to support and encourage such detestable villainy is like a judge who should inscribe the arms of a rogue over the seat of justice. In other words, a judge makes a rogue his deputy, right? That's effectively what he is saying. He sees legal tender laws as the devil manifested in law. And so we have this as a problem right now in Hamilton County. This is a problem. Okay, we have this as something we're required to deal with, and inflation simply inflation is a monetary phenomenon purely. It's the increase in the monetary base of a given medium of exchange. So the dollar, when we have inflation in dollars, in Federal Reserve dollars, that means there's more of it. And but we commonly, though, that's I guess you might say the technical definition. The real definition. Commonly, though, we refer to inflation as what we're paying for things. Now, that the payment picture is just a kind of fruit of inflation. It is an evidence of it, but it's not the inflation itself. The inflation itself is done in the banking sector, in the national economy, and in every local bank by the issuance of loans on a fractional reserve system, which are again just made not because the borrower is getting the dollars put there by somebody else, but the borrower is getting dollars made from nothing. They're just created in the double bookkeeping entry system of modern banks here in Hamilton. A state regulator. This is all the state of Tennessee approves all of these things. Perhaps one of the 6 or 7 things the Lord hates. Well, 6 things the Lord hates, even 7. That would be the state's regulation of official counterfeiting, and we're all the poorer for it. And so I'm telling you today here on the David Tulis Show at Nooga Radio that you're poorer than you thought. You thought that, well, I'm glad that the Fed's reaching its targets. We all want there to be, we all want there to be more employment, right? Because that's the pretended barometer by Grandma Yellen of how they're doing, right? How are we doing? She intones in her presentations before Congress. How are we doing? And then she has these long, tedious explanations that really don't say much. But in the end, it's a very simple operation. We can make more credit or less credit. We can monetize the national debt. We can debase the buying power of you, my listener, and me, David Tulis, your host here at Nooga Radio. We grandees in Washington and Baltimore and New York, we don't care about these people. For us, it's systemic. We look at the system as a whole, right? We have a public health perspective. We don't care about the individual, just as the public health perspective in the vaccine story it disregards entirely the damage to thousands and thousands of individuals whose damage is handled outside of the law in a federally created special compensation scheme that effectively denies the applying of liability to drug makers. Drug makers are the story today. We're going to get to that in a minute. The drug industry is as bad as the banking industry. These are national industries. They are profiteering industries. They are, I would say, they're like the gambling industry, and with state support. Here in Tennessee, the story out of Las Vegas is a story about a gambler. And it's also a story about pharmacopoeia, about the drug industry, the legal drug industry that the states regulate. The Tennessee regulates drugs, the national government regulates drugs, and the American people are the victim. And you, my listener, can see that all around you. We have, I'm not going to do details today, but we know if we read the Times Free Press, there are efforts by the Attorney General to inquire into drug manufacturers. We have a plague of addiction to these medications, which are they work with the sin problem in individuals to make them addicted. So you have fallen man, and you have these very powerful addictive narcotics, and there's no escape. And Stephen Paddock is a patient, right? He is a patient, as many other massacre heroes are patients as well. It's a story about we have in the idea of Paddock's addiction to gambling. We have it connects with Tennessee in this sense that we have strip mining state economy overseers in the Tennessee lottery. The Tennessee lottery is a picture of the capitalization upon vice, right? Taking a vice and capitalizing on it, making a profit from it, and pretending it's a holy act. And we're supporting public schools. And well, this is David Tulis, and we're being hurt more badly than we thought by inflation. I'm just changing the subject, but I think we want to get now to the subjects that I think are most in front of your mind. David Tulis, I do thank you for giving me just a minute of your time. We are here arguing for a local economy in the free market. Love your neighbor, and buy local. That's my theme. That's my theory. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM